Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Run Cape Town podcast. We're already on episode 10, 5 weeks out from race date. My name's Jamie, and I'm once again joined by Coach Ntutu, and we are running coaches at coachparry.com. Today, we'll be chatting about the recovery week that many runners might be going into from tomorrow onwards, managing any niggles or injury or illness that might have cropped up throughout your training, and then also as a sort of ending off to the session today, expectations for the final push. So before we get started into that, in Tutu, it is Sunday. So have you been running this morning?
Yeah, so like most of the people who are doing marathon training now, you did a long run this weekend. I did my long run this morning. Not quite as long as people doing marathon training, thankfully, because I'm not training for a marathon. I'm just doing my summer-based training. But I did 2 hours today, about 26 Ks, and I'm famished. I've been feasting, so having a banana. I've had breakfast. I had a chocolate milkshake straight after my run. And that's very, very
Lovely.
important. It's something that you never ever forget is that after these long runs, they really you use a lot of energy. Even for me doing 2 hours, but you guys will have done 3 hours, 3.5 hours. For some people, you really do need to take care of post-run recovery, nutrition. I like to get a good stretch in, but of course that's very different to other people. Other people like to get into the pool, whatever it is that you need to do. But your recovery after the long run is important. And of course, with the long run, it leads into the recovery week. I'm also going into recovery week, so I'm almost in sync with our fellow runners. Next week is a down week for me as well. Yeah, so it's pretty cool.
Oh, fantastic. Well done on your run this morning. And to those listening, we might have runners that maybe raced today or over this weekend. I know that across South Africa, the racing scene was quite busy. And then also maybe those that have just done their longest run yet of this training cycle. So, just to give everyone a bit of context on where different runners might be, if you sort of on that 4 week cycle that we spoke about, where every fourth a week or so is a recovery week, a lighter week, then some people might be going into that, but others might have just raced this weekend. And we do recommend resting, especially the longer you went on that race, then of course, resting over the next few days, taking some time off before we get into another last cycle before race date. So, if you are going into your taper week, then the week after that will probably have your longest long run of your training cycle, and some others might have that on a different sort of weekend or perhaps week. But in Tutu, as we spoke about now, would you mind just explaining everyone if they have raced over the weekend, what should their sort of next few days look like?
So I think we mentioned this last week as well when people were about to race with the gun run and those races coming up. And if you are racing this weekend, and I think there are obviously a few races on the calendar, I think it's so this past week would have been gun run, I think. Yeah, gun run.
Yes, this current
Um,
weekend, yes.
yeah, so if you've just done gun run or any of the races that were around, you've got to be very, very careful in your recovery week. And I think people think, oh, it's fine. I've had like an easy week leading into the race. I can just carry on. And I think we spoke about this last week in preparation for this week, that a half marathon in particular takes a lot out of you. I still say it is the most disrespected race distance. It's kind of an in-between distance where it's not as intensely hard as a 10K and not as long as a marathon. So we don't really factor it in. And most people do half marathons as races in the build up to a marathon. But if you do go out and you do race one really, really hard, especially if there's any hills in the route and a lot of downhill, you've got to be very, very careful about recovery. And the recovery week is even more important for you if you've raced.
Mm.
Because there's so much more eccentric loading from running hard at race pace. And you're obviously going to, as I said, you're going to use more resources, your muscle glycogen, and just general fatigue. So you need to take from Monday, be very, very deliberate about your recovery. Make sure you're getting in more sleep. You're probably going to have to start eating a little bit more and doing all the things like foam rolling and strength training and easing yourself back into training. So don't jump in and start doing interval training this week. Make sure you keep your runs short and easy. And what you want to be doing is listening to your body. So you want to pay attention to how your muscles are feeling. It's not quite as long as a marathon, but you will feel muscle soreness And what you want to do is don't start doing any faster running until that muscle soreness dissipates. I found from experience it takes about 3 to 5 days after a
Mm,
half marathon before you feel normal. Even for a hard 10K, it might be about 3 to 4 days. A 5K, if you made a 5K, not so much, but it's still something that you need to think about. And particularly with us gearing up for a marathon, what we want to be doing now is, man, and we'll speak about the fatigue as we go through this podcast, that the fatigue is the thing that you want to manage. You don't want to be getting to that last 4 weeks carrying a lot more fatigue than you need to, because then that's going to mean your taper won't be, and again, the taper is something we'll talk about in later episodes, that the taper won't be as effective in getting you back
mm,
into prime fitness for race days. So just be very, very conscious of how much fatigue you're carrying into the following week, and don't try and rush back into training because you feel like, oh, I've lost some time because I had to do a little bit of a taper for my race and now I need to take 3 or 4 days recovery. That you're losing training time. You are not. This
yeah.
rest period is actually making you stronger and building you back up, and the recovery is what's going to help you come back stronger and better.
No, 100%. I think for anyone, whether they raced or they are going into recovery now, everyone's feeling a bit of fatigue. Things have been building up over their training and their marathon preparation, and we do need some recovery built in now, whether you raced or you've just been training as per your plan, before we go into the final little bit of a build with that long run coming up in a week or so, and
Yeah.
then tapering things down to race date. So we really need to focus on recovery now, and as you said, whether that is after your race or we're going to focus on the week coming up, focus on those pillars of recovery as well, getting in your sleep, eating. Just because you might be resting or training less doesn't mean you need to eat less necessarily. You should still keep up, normal diet, all of that. You might not need to sort of plan around, your pre-workout meal if you're not going to work out, but of course, carry on eating normal volumes as you
Yeah.
go. In my opinion, it's my favorite time, my favorite week, because I can just carry on eating and I don't have to worry about when am I going to fit in, a 2-hour run, etc. So
Yeah.
enjoy it before the next little build. And so, yeah, I think, yeah, very, very important to mention. But with the recovery week in Tutu, is there anything that you would avoid runners to do as they might be going into that week coming up or resting after their runs?
So just to step back a bit, like we spoke a little bit about the fatigue, and I think what I always like to do with the recovery is to take stock of sort of where you are right now.
Mm,
And I think we can talk about all the training you've done. You've done all your long runs, you've done your interval sessions, and you should be feeling prepared. Like I'd hope you're feeling prepared that you've done all the work, and you should feel like you've been building up. But part of the reality of marathon training is that it is a long, arduous process. And a lot of people talk about this idea of cumulative fatigue, and that as you go through a marathon plan, yes, we have rest days, yes, we have recovery weeks, but actually you are building stress.
mm,
And that stress does build up throughout the plan. And in this middle 4 week block, so if you're doing following a 12-week plan, consider the first 4 weeks as being sort of getting your training volume up and getting yourself ready. The middle 4 weeks for me is really the important bit. That's when you really do your interval sessions become very well defined. And as this past weekend, you build your long run up to probably about 3 hours for most people. So you are carrying a lot of fatigue in your system. And that's why these recovery weeks are so important for you to just bring a bit of freshness back in and allow yourself to adapt and recover. So at this point in time, you're 4 weeks, 5 weeks out and heading into week 8, possibly your training plan. What a lot of people do is they think, why do I need to take a break now? I'm so close to race day. Surely I should be continuing. I should be building fitness, because by taking a break now, am I
yeah.
not disadvantaging myself for the marathon? But if you try and cram in more training during this week, you are going to be doing the opposite. You're going to build that fatigue up even more. And then in week 10, 4 weeks out, you're going to do your longest long run, maybe 3.5 hours, 3 hours 45, depending on what plan you're on. And now you've added in the long run this weekend, or an extra marathon pace run, whatever it is that you think you need. And suddenly you do your
Yeah.
longest run and you're very, very tired. So what I don't want to see people doing in the recovery week is trying to do it as an opportunity to build more fitness, to add more training, to do more long
Mm,
runs. or to do that extra, people want to go and do a half marathon at marathon pace just to test themselves to see, am I ready? This is not the week to do that. This week is about recovering and getting yourself back up and ready to carry on for the last 4 weeks. What you really want to avoid is any unnecessary tests of fitness. I think that's the thing that happens in people's mindset is I'm not fit. I don't feel fit. I don't feel right. And the logic of a runner is if you don't feel fit, you want to test yourself. If you don't feel fit, you want
Yeah.
to do more work because you think that's what you need. But actually, if you are feeling not ready and fatigued, that means you actually need to pull back a little bit more and say, oh, I'm actually a little bit tired. And what I think also what I want to get across is that you don't judge yourself based on how you feel during peak volume weeks. When you run your marathon, you're not going to come off a 3.5 hour run and then run your marathon 2 days later. We have a whole
Mm,
process of getting you race day. So you cannot judge your fitness based on how you're feeling now, because this is a build phase. In the build phase, you are going to be a little bit tired and you are going to feel, and I think the worst thing is people feel, they do their long runs and it's 3.5 hours, easy run pace. They think, oh, I can't manage this. I'm going to struggle I can't hold this pace at an easy pace for 3 hours. I'm going to do this for a marathon.
yeah.
On the interval sessions, you find yourself struggling to hit the actual pace, and you think, if I can't hit, you know, 4.5, 5 minutes a K, 6.5, 6 minutes a K, and I'm only doing, 10 Ks worth of work, how am I going to do this for 42 Ks? But this is not the time to judge yourself, because in the context of where you are in peak volume, you're doing high volume and high intensity and all of that stuff together and doing strength training, but you're
Mm,
not fresh for race day. We're not at peak point yet. The training plan is designed to get you to a peak on race day, not a peak 4 weeks out. If you could run your marathon today, then you could go out and run your marathon, but that's not what you're trying to do here. So just be very, very careful of getting into your head and judging yourself in a scenario which won't reflect what it will be like for you on race day. And I think that's very, very important for runners to remember that we're building you to a peak in 5 weeks' time, not a peak now.
yeah, I think amazing things happen after that taper, and things that will surprise you if you haven't yet
Yeah,
experienced that feeling. It feels during or leading up to the taper and during the taper, it feels like, how am I going to run this race? And then,
yeah.
after the race, you can reflect back and just see what an amazing difference it makes. But
Can I just give
for
an
those
example
that,
of
oh
of
yes, yeah,
of, of pacing? So when I was training for my marathon, and I know we speak about this a lot, but I have a park run that I used to do when I was in London, and I mean my park run PB is at this park run route, and I went in the middle of my marathon training, woke up and like I'm going to go and do a park run to test myself. I'm doing the thing that I'm telling people not to do. I went to test myself in the middle of marathon training. And even like I said, my parkrun PB's at this course. And I went out and I ran this parkrun and I thought, the first K I'm pushing, I'm running really hard. I must be going quickly. And I checked the first split and it's like I'm so far off where I need to be. And I finished the parkrun and I was almost 90 seconds slower than my parkrun PB on the day.
oh no,
And in fact, my pace for the 5K ended up being only 14 seconds faster than my actual marathon pace on race day. So that park run did not in any way reflect my ability. It was a reflection of the fact that the week before I'd done a 35K long run. So it was a reflection of like, I'd done big volume, I'm tired. I was not in a position to run a 5K and run a fast time. But the thing is, you don't want to dwell in those moments. So this period of training is not the training where you want to be testing yourself and you're not going to be performing as well as you are because you are doing high volume training. And the focus is on the work. But then you recover and then you taper and things will come back and you'll feel yourself, get fresher, and the taper is worthwhile. But I mean, we'll talk about the taper in proper detail later, but it is a thing that's coming up. And so don't judge yourself now. These runs don't tell you how you're going to perform. You're building fitness, not building race readiness like right now.
yes. So, with those athletes that do have a recovery week scheduled, we have mentioned sort of ending a recovery week with like a 5K time trial. Would you recommend 5 to 10Ks being okay? Anything longer than that, we'd start to, incorporate extra rest afterwards.
So with this final recovery week, one thing that I would recommend is that the time to race a half marathon is long sailed. So I know on the weekend of the 20th, at the end of this week, there's the Chapman's Peak half marathon in Cape Town. If you are doing that run and you've got it scheduled, it's there's nothing you can do about that. You've entered, you're going to go do it, but don't go out there and try and race it. 4 weeks out from your race day is not the time to be racing a half marathon. It just requires too much recovery, and it is a long distance. It's 21 Ks, it's half your marathon distance, and 4 weeks out, most people just don't recover enough from it, and you have and that leads to a poor performance on race days. So if you wanted to race a half marathon, that was something you should have done 6 weeks before race day. At this point in time, please don't race. So if you've entered half marathons this coming weekend, do them as easy runs. Do them at your normal long run pace, taking care about recovery before and after. So you can do a 5 and a 10K. My preference again with a 10K is that a 10K is still a hard race. If you are very fit and experienced, you can do a 10K, and it can give you some idea of where you are. Now, what I will say is this, like, I think people will do races now and look at their times and think that will give them an idea of sort of their marathon finish. I don't like to use the time trial this close to a race as like a predictor of your marathon pace. I want to check if I'm on track. So when you started your training plan, you said you want to do a 4-hour marathon, for example. And we said if you want to do a 4-hour marathon, your 5K time should be about 24:40, 24:45, which means your 10K time should be about 51 minutes, roughly. So if you were to race a 10K this weekend, you're not trying to run a PB. What you want to see is you want to see that you haven't lost anything from where you were in week 1 or in week 4. You know what I mean? So you are almost seeing it as a confirmation of that your training has done its job, but you're not necessarily going to run PBs. I think people think that if you're training for a marathon, running a 10K PB in your marathon plan is not the be all and end all. You may run a PB. For a lot of people, doing marathon training means they're running more volume, doing longer runs that builds endurance and builds stamina. And inadvertently, you run PBs because you are just doing a lot more training. But that's not the goal. We're not trying to race you to run a good 10K. And in fact, if you are in good 10K shape, I'd be a bit concerned about your marathon performance, because the requirements for a 10K with a marathon, you need to be sparing glycogen and, with a bit more fat oxidation. And it's sort of a slower pace. A 10K needs you to be able to produce like a lot of power and run hard for 30, 40, 50 minutes. And that's almost counter to running a good marathon.
Yes.
So what you can do is you can use a 10K race almost like as a race pace workout. I like to use a 10K. If you do a 10K, you can use it as a marathon pace workout. Just, learn how marathon pace feels like. It's short enough that it's not going to hurt, but you don't want to be doing it too much harder than that. A 5K, you can probably run a hard 5K, but just take it for what it is. Remembering that you are not training for a 5K. Your training plan is not geared towards getting your 5K PB. You just want to be able to run strong and consistent. And you might feel you don't have that extra gear. That's normal because your training you haven't been doing the hard anaerobic stuff. You haven't been doing a lot of faster running sort of at the top end of where you are. So you will not be able to maybe push yourself as hard as you can. And as long as you understand those limitations, it's fine to do it, and it's a good break. Also, it's also just I think people just also need the confidence of being able to realize that they can still run a little bit harder, but just manage your expectations, and remember what your end goal is. Always keep your eye on the prize, on the bigger picture.
Definitely trusting the process, as you said.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
what if athletes are now getting to the stage where they've been doing high training volumes? They are, of course, doing marathon training, not 10K, as you were saying. And they're getting into their longest run coming up. And they might be trusting the process, but unexpected or maybe things that not feeling good are cropping up. So maybe we're feeling a bit of a niggle or an injury developing, or athletes. I know we've spoken about illness preventing it in the past, but what if those things are starting to crop up and we need to now manage them going forward? What would you suggest there?
So we spoke extensively about specifically injury prevention as well, that it's a really critical part. And we laid out the strategies. You need to do strength training, you need to manage how you increase your volume, your paces. But as much as we try and control injury, we can't eliminate injury risk. It's physically impossible to do. So we are doing a lot of mitigation. And if you do train smart, there's a good chance that you're not going to get injured. But unfortunately, it's a reality that it happens, that you pick up niggles along the way. And the second part is winter in South Africa right now. It's cold and flu season. COVID is still around. That hasn't gone away. If you have young kids, I used to get sick a lot when my child went to school. He picks up bugs, brings them home when he was younger. Thankfully, he's a teenager now, and it's less, it's less of an issue. But it does happen that you do go out and you pick up things and you get sick, and there's nothing you can do about it. So
No.
what is critical when that happens is that you need to not train through. And I've just mentioned now that at this point in time, people are worried about, have they done enough training? Have they done, do they have enough time? They're running out of time. And so if you get sick now, you think, oh God, I'm going to lose a week of training or whatever. So this really puts me under pressure. But what happens then is if you try and push through training, so let's start with the illness first, because that's the easiest thing. If you are sick, your body has to invest a lot of resources into getting you better. Your adaptive immune system is quite a complex system with antibodies and things, and that's a very energetically costly endeavor. And that's part of why you get a fever and things, because your body is doing all this work to get you better. And then you go out and you think, I'm going to go and do a run because I've got a marathon in 4 weeks. Again, running is a non-essential event. It's a thing we do for fun, but it's also costly. It's also cost the body energy. So now you're challenging your body on two fronts, managing the illness and you trying to train through. So something has to give. And all that happens is that you are going to, well, firstly, the quality of your training is going to be poor. If you're sick and you go out and you try and do a long run while you're ill, you're going to be struggling, you're going to be slower than you are, you're going to be shuffling through, and then you are delaying your body's response to fighting that infection. So you're actually just prolonging your sickness. So what ends up being 2 or 3 days, maybe, of being under the weather and then 1 day recovery, then you can come back, you are now out for a week because you are now finding after that long run, you're coughing and sneezing even more and your fever gets worse. Suddenly 3 days is 5 days, is 7 days, is 10 days, and you've lost a lot more time. And the same thing applies to the injury side of things. Again, if your body is injured, and there's a difference between being sore. When you go out and you do an interval session, your muscles get stiff because it's that loading. You're loading your muscles, you're physiologically challenging yourself. So you do get sore and you get tired. But I'm talking about like pain that actually affects your running, that affects your mechanics, where it's actually painful to put your foot down, where you can't run properly. That kind of injury, first you need to, at this stage in time, don't delay seeing a physio. If you can get access to a physio, don't think, oh, I'll wait and try it out for 2 days and see what happens, and try and run through and sort of manage it. If this race is important for you, go out and get that injury assessed as soon as you can by a specialist, by a physio or whoever. And then you need to then engage in that important rehab period. And again, same thing like with the illness. If you deal with the injury very, very quickly in that acute phase when it's still, and you don't train through. So if you're at the track or you're doing a long run and you feel like, your hamstring goes or your ITB flares up, please don't try and finish the run and say, oh, I'm going to manage this afterwards. Turn around and go home.
No.
It's not worth pushing through and risking it. Again, all you're doing is you're not giving your body a lot more work to do afterwards to repair. So if you can get that sorted out and seen as early as possible, again, you shorten that recovery time. And we've got to really go back to, we've spoken about how you don't lose, like we're so nervous about losing fitness, but it takes a long time to lose running specific fitness. And we're talking like 3 weeks. Like it really is and that's 3 weeks of doing absolutely nothing. You can sit on your couch and watch series for 3 weeks, and only then will you start to see significant losses in fitness. And even you'll still be able to run. You might not be in tip-top shape, but you'll still be able to go out and run. If you're out for 3 or 5 days, I promise you've lost no fitness. You'll be a bit sluggish because your body hasn't been used to the movement, but a few days back, you'll be fine. If you're 5 to 10 days sort of out, you will start seeing muscle reactivity will go down. You'll start seeing some declines in VO2, but again, nothing significant that you can't that you can't come back from. It's once you hit 2 weeks plus that you start to see difference that actually make a difference. And that's why it is important when you're sick or picking up niggles that you don't train through, because then you're going to end up risking being in that 2 week window. And you do not want to lose 2 weeks of training now.
Yeah.
Rather take 3 days to recover than try and train through and then end up missing 2 weeks. Lindsay always says, when Lindsay was coaching me back in the day, and he'd say to athletes, and he still says it, when in doubt, take 48 hours. Take 48 hours, do what you need to do in terms of rehab, like if you use like, things like ICE, I know there's different acronyms for how you manage acute phase of injury, go see a physio, but 48 hours. And then you can come back and see how it is. But just don't try and train through. Training through is never, ever worth it, and definitely not at this key point in your training.
No. As we mentioned, this is also the perfect time for recovery. So if you are in doubt, rather just rest it out. As you said, I think
Yeah,
the risk reward ratio, we need to just think about that. You mustn't also forget that you have already done basically 2 months, if not more, of training.
yeah,
And
no,
that doesn't
exactly.
just go down the drain. That is still there. And as you mentioned, it'll take 2 to 3 weeks to really have significant declines. And that's if you're lying in bed all day. But
Yeah,
most of our listeners are probably, carrying on with their day-to-day responsibilities, work
yeah,
and all of those things. And so you are probably not lying in bed all day for your day-to-day responsibilities.
yeah,
And you are out and about, even though you might not be heading out on an easy run or doing an interval session, etc. So yeah, I think it's important for everyone just to listen to their bodies while there's all of this fatigue coming up, and also just trying to calm yourself down when all of those worries are creeping into the mind, because it can literally be panic station
yeah,
leading
no,
up
exactly.
from now to race date, even before the taper started.
Yeah,
I know, yeah, when I've tapered in the past, I genuinely thought I was the slowest. I've totally become just, I've lost all my
yeah,
speed, lost all my
the taper
fitness, and I'm
blues.
just out of breath. Yeah, completely. It's not great, and then race day comes, and you forget about all of those things. But
Yeah,
and
no,
Tutu,
exactly.
moving into sort of, after this recovery week or recovery period, we'll be into the final month. I can't believe it. And for everyone
Yeah,
hearing that, please don't panic. It's still 4 weeks. We will be moving into the final little push. And so
yeah.
for that, we've of course got a few milestones coming up, and Tutu, if you'd just like to outline those for our listeners.
So again, as Jamie has said, like you've done 2 months of training, and that training is not going to go away. It's training that's in the bank. And I think it's funny that as we do more training, and I suppose maybe it's a proof of concept. You've done all this training, maybe, and it's also that it's important to you that we start to worry that, oh, have we done enough? Are we ready? But the training is there; it's done. And if you've been sensible with all of the important things we've spoken about, you should be coming out of this recovery week now feeling somewhat refreshed when you're through it. And the last 4 weeks, like in my personal opinion, like the bulk of training is now done. So these next 2 weeks after the recovery week are sort of more like the icing on the cake. Like your masterpiece is almost complete. And now you're just sharpening everything up and tightening everything up and making it look great and ready for the taper. So for the next little bit, the things that are coming up is for a lot of people, it will be the longest run. So you have, I know you're thinking, gosh, I've done 3 hours, I've done 3 hours 20, there's one more run. Unfortunately, yes, again, the final icing on the cake, usually 4 weeks out, 3 weeks out, the third Sunday before the race, you normally do your longest run. For some people, it might be, for the more advanced runners, it might be a more race specific session. So I know for sub 3 hour runners, we often have the final sort of marathon pace practice session. But again, it all depends on your plan. Plans are set for different levels, and we focus on different things depending on what level of performance you're at. But this next week is going to be probably your highest volume week with your longest run. It's a very, very important milestone, but don't get scared. You are ready for it. You've done all the build-up work to it, and this is the final sort of hard workout. But that's not your final sort of big week. 3 weeks out, because our plans are usually 2-week tapers, and again, we'll get into the science of the taper in an upcoming episode. You'll still have one more big week. It won't be as big as the week before, but it will be a big week with another long run and possibly one more big session. And then it's the taper. So, and the taper is really when things come together. It's, I almost I refer to it more as peaking. You are now working your way
Yes.
towards your goal race. So those are sort of the things coming up. So what you need to think about again is, we spoke about all these things before, like again, with your long run, practice your nutrition, practice running in your kit. In your faster runs, we've got interval sessions, practice your running shoes, the shoes you're going to use for the race itself. Make sure everything is ready and that you're heading in the right direction. And then you need to now start thinking very clearly about your goal. And we'll talk about goal setting coming up as well. That you haven't just been training randomly and haphazardly doing sessions. You have an idea of what you want to achieve, and I hope you have been on the ball about your goal. So now you start thinking about the goal, and this might be a good time and on the Cape Town Marathon website, they do have the route profile there. So go have a look at the route, and you need to know what to expect. So, and we'll talk about pacing the route, but it's important because while we have an idea of the ideal pacing strategy for a marathon, it's an even negative split. Cape Town has some hills along the way. So we need to talk through how to approach different sections of the race, and you just always start visualizing your race at this point. So that's where sort of you're thinking about the milestones that you've got coming up, and then thinking about your goal time and how you're going to approach the race, because that's important. Pacing on race day is going to be the thing that ultimately decides how well you do. Once all the training is done, where people do lose out is that they either don't plan appropriately for the race, or they do have a plan and just ignore it and try and bank time and that sort of thing. So you need to start thinking about those things. And again, trusting the process and confidence in your plan and knowing that you can actually execute the race plan, but it needs to be based on actual evidence. You can't just,
Yeah.
I decide I want to go and run it, a 220 marathon or whatever. I don't know, because whatever, it's not possible. So you need to be realistic about your goals. And if you have done a few races along the way, those are things that we use to inform your goal. But we'll speak more about that and exactly how you go about doing that. So that's kind of where we are. So it's the last 4 weeks, really about managing expectations and starting to visualize where you're at. And you're in the final stretch. You've almost done it. And we're very, very close. And I hope it is exciting, because you should be getting excited about
Yeah.
what you're about to do.
Completely. But if that excitement hasn't yet kicked in, that was now a summary of the final push, the last 4 weeks. And we are still 5 weeks out. So if you're still panicking a little bit, don't worry about the episodes to come just yet. You go and enjoy this recovery time. That is your focus. It's day to day. And although there is a larger plan, this week is all you need to focus on. Go and enjoy yourself. Of course, keep up your recovery week training and movement, but go and enjoy some extra sleep, maybe some later mornings, getting out of bed. It's good stuff after the hard work you've been putting in and the final push that you only need to worry about in a week's time or so. But thanks, Ntutu. We'll see you next week.
Thank you, Jamie.